An innocent little girl vanished without a trace in 1998, no witnesses, no answers, no clues. For 9 long years, her mother refused to stop searching, even after the entire town lost hope. But on a freezing winter night, inside a crowded roadside diner, one overheard phone call exposed a terrifying secret hidden for nearly a decade. What investigators uncovered next shocked the entire town of Ashwood forever. The summer of 1998 had settled gently over the small town of Ashwood, Missouri. It was the kind of quiet American town where children rode bicycles until sunset, neighbors waved from porches, and every family believed nothing truly terrible could happen there. On Maple Street, 11-year-old Emily Carter spent her afternoons drawing in a notebook she carried everywhere. She loved sketching birds, old barns, and the creek behind her school. Her mother, Sarah Carter, often said Emily saw beauty in places most people ignored. Sarah worked long hours at a local diner after her husband passed away 2 years earlier in a highway accident. Life had not been easy since then, but she and Emily had built a peaceful routine together. Every morning, Sarah packed Emily's lunch, braided her light brown hair, and walked her to the bus stop before heading to work. Every evening, they ate dinner on the porch and talked about school, dreams, and the future. Emily wanted to become an artist one day and travel across America painting landscapes. Sarah held onto those conversations tightly because they reminded her that hope still existed after loss. On Friday, June 12, everything seemed completely normal. The day began with bright sunshine and humid air drifting through town. Emily woke up excited because school had officially ended for summer break the day before. Sarah promised they would visit the county fair that weekend if business at the diner stayed calm. Emily spent the morning helping her mother water flowers outside their small white house while country music played softly from a nearby radio. Nothing about the day hinted at the nightmare that was waiting. Around noon, Sarah received a call from her manager asking if she could cover an extra shift because another employee had become sick. Money had been tight for months, so she agreed. Before leaving, she reminded Emily to stay inside after dark and not wander far from the neighborhood creek. Emily smiled and promised she would be careful. It was the last normal conversation Sarah would ever have with her daughter. By late afternoon, several neighborhood children gathered near the old playground behind Ashwood Elementary School. Witnesses later remembered seeing Emily there wearing blue overalls and white sneakers, laughing while chasing fireflies that appeared early in the warm evening air. Some said she mentioned stopping by Miller's grocery store to buy candy before heading home. But Emily never returned. At first, Sarah assumed her daughter had stayed with friends longer than expected. She arrived home exhausted shortly after 8:30 p.m. and noticed the porch light was still off. Emily always turned it on before sunset because she knew her mother disliked coming home to darkness. Sarah stepped inside the silent house and called Emily's name once, then again louder. No answer. Her stomach tightened instantly. Sarah searched every room, checked the backyard, and even looked behind the house near the old swing set Emily used as a child. Nothing. The sketchbook Emily carried everywhere was gone too. Thinking her daughter might still be with friends, Sarah began knocking on doors throughout the neighborhood. One by one, neighbors shook their heads. Nobody had seen Emily since late afternoon. Fear slowly transformed into panic. At 10:17 p.m., Sarah called the Ashwood Police Department. Officers initially believed Emily had simply wandered off or lost track of time. In 1998, small towns still carried a dangerous sense of innocence. Missing child cases were often treated as misunderstandings during the first critical hours. Still, Officer Daniel Reeves agreed to drive around town and check nearby roads. Midnight arrived. Then 1 a.m. Emily was still gone. Sarah sat on her porch gripping Emily's favorite denim jacket, while police officers searched empty streets beneath flickering streetlights. Volunteers from the community joined the effort before sunrise. Farmers checked open fields. Teenagers searched wooded trails near the creek. Church groups organized search lines stretching across miles of land surrounding Ashwood. The entire town became consumed by the disappearance. Yet there was not a single clue. No signs of struggle. No abandoned bicycle. No footprints near the creek. Nothing. The mystery deepened when Miller's grocery store owner claimed Emily had indeed stopped by that evening around 6:15 p.m. He remembered her clearly because she bought strawberry candy and asked if the payphone outside still worked. According to him, Emily appeared nervous while glancing repeatedly toward the parking lot. That detail haunted Sarah immediately. Why would Emily need the payphone? And who had been outside watching her? Police searched the area carefully, but discovered no evidence. Security cameras were rare in small-town businesses during the late 1990s, leaving investigators with almost nothing to work with. Officers interviewed residents for days, but every lead faded into uncertainty. Rumors spread. Weeks passed. Then months. Summer turned into autumn, and autumn disappeared into winter. Posters carrying Emily's smiling school photograph covered gas stations, grocery stores, church windows, and telephone poles across Missouri. Sarah refused to stop searching. She traveled to nearby towns handing out flyers herself, begging strangers for information. Local newspapers followed the story closely during the first year, describing Emily as Ashwood's missing little girl. But eventually, attention faded. New stories replaced old ones. The volunteers returned to their normal lives. Even some investigators quietly lost hope. Sarah never did. Every night before sleeping, she left Emily's bedroom untouched. Her drawings remained pinned to the walls exactly where she left them. Her shoes stayed beside the bed. Dust slowly gathered across shelves filled with storybooks and crayons, but Sarah could not bring herself to move anything. Somewhere deep inside, she believed her daughter would walk through the front door again. Then came the phone calls. About 8 months after Emily vanished, Sarah began receiving silent late-night calls. The caller never spoke. She would answer and hear only breathing before the line disconnected. At first, police assumed it was cruel pranksters exploiting the tragedy. But the calls continued for years. Sometimes weeks passed without one. Other times they happened 3 nights in a row. Sarah became terrified of the sound of ringing telephones. Still, no trace of Emily was ever found. By 2003, the case had grown cold. Detective Reeves had retired, and new officers barely remembered the original investigation. Ashwood tried to move forward, but Sarah remained trapped in the past. She worked fewer shifts at the diner and spent most evenings sitting alone on the porch, staring down Maple Street, as if expecting Emily to appear at any moment. People in town pitied her quietly. Some called her broken. Others said grief had frozen her life completely. Then, during the winter of 2007, nearly 9 years after Emily disappeared, something happened that would change everything. A phone call. A single overheard conversation in a crowded roadside diner. And one sentence that would force Sarah Carter to uncover a terrifying truth hidden for nearly a decade. Winter arrived heavily across Missouri in early January of 2007. Snow covered the streets of Ashwood in pale silence, and freezing winds rattled the windows of the small roadside diner where Sarah Carter still worked evening shifts. Nearly 9 years had passed since Emily disappeared, yet Sarah continued living as though time had stopped in 1998. The grief had aged her far beyond her 42 years. Dark circles rested permanently beneath her eyes, and the hopeful smile she once carried had slowly disappeared from her face. Most nights at the diner followed the same routine. Truck drivers stopped for coffee. Local workers filled the booths after long shifts. Country music played softly through an old radio near the kitchen, while steam fogged the windows against the cold outside. Sarah usually kept her head down and avoided conversations that might lead to questions about Emily. But on the night of January 14th, something unusual happened. The diner was crowded because of a snowstorm moving through the county. Around 8:40 p.m., 2 men entered wearing thick winter jackets and work boots coated in slush. Sarah recognized neither of them. They chose a booth near the back corner beneath a flickering light and ordered coffee along with bowls of chili. One appeared older, maybe in his late 50s, with rough hands and gray stubble along his jaw. The younger man looked nervous from the moment he sat down. He kept glancing toward the windows as though afraid someone might be watching. Sarah paid little attention at first. She refilled their coffee twice while handling other customers, but during her third trip to their table, she overheard something that caused her entire body to freeze. The younger man spoke quietly, almost whispering. "You should have told somebody years ago. That girl deserved better." Sarah stopped moving. For a brief second, the sound of the diner seemed to disappear completely. The older man immediately lowered his voice further, replying sharply, "Keep your mouth shut. Nobody knows anything." Sarah tried convincing herself the conversation meant nothing. Missing child cases happened across America every year. They could have been discussing another story entirely. But then she heard the younger man say one sentence that made her blood run cold. She was wearing blue overalls, remember? The exact outfit Emily had been wearing the day she vanished. Sarah nearly dropped the coffee pot in her hands. Her breathing became shallow as memories crashed violently into her mind. She remembered braiding Emily's hair that morning. She remembered adjusting the straps on those overalls before leaving for work. Very few details from the investigation had ever been shared publicly, especially not specific clothing descriptions. How could this stranger know that? Trying not to attract attention, Sarah moved behind the counter while pretending to organize receipts. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper. Every instinct told her to call police immediately, yet fear rooted her in place. She listened carefully while the men continued talking in fragments too quiet to fully understand. Then the older man noticed her staring. For several seconds, their eyes locked across the diner. A strange expression crossed his face, not confusion, but recognition. It lasted only a moment. The man quickly placed cash on the table, stood up, and told his companion they were leaving. Both men exited into the storm before Sarah could react. Panic surged through her as she rushed to the window, but visibility outside had become terrible. Snow whipped across the highway while headlights disappeared into darkness. She never saw what vehicle they entered. The moment they vanished, Sarah called the police. Most officers initially believed stress and grief might have caused her to misinterpret the conversation. After all, almost 9 years had passed without solid evidence. But Detective Alan Pierce, a newer investigator recently assigned to review old cold cases, agreed to meet her the next morning. Unlike some others in town, Detective Pierce listened carefully. Sarah repeated every word she heard inside the diner. She described both men in detail, especially the older man's face. Something about him felt disturbingly familiar, though she could not explain why. Pierce took notes quietly before asking a question nobody had ever asked her before. Did Emily know anyone outside town? Anyone you may have overlooked years ago? Sarah immediately said no. But later that evening, while sitting alone inside Emily's untouched bedroom, an old memory slowly resurfaced. A man named Walter Grayson. Back in 1998, Walter occasionally visited the diner where Sarah worked. He lived outside town on a large isolated property surrounded by woods. People described him as quiet and strange but harmless. Emily had met him once or twice when accompanying Sarah to work during school holidays. Walter often sketched pictures on napkins and gave them to children eating at the diner. Emily had once mentioned that he talked funny but drew beautiful birds. At the time, Sarah thought nothing of it. But suddenly another memory returned, one she had buried for years. About a month before Emily vanished, Sarah came home unexpectedly early one afternoon and found Walter standing outside near their mailbox. He claimed his truck had broken down nearby and asked to borrow a phone. Emily had been talking to him through the front fence moments before Sarah arrived. The encounter lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet after thinking back carefully, Sarah remembered how uncomfortable she felt afterward. Walter seemed overly interested in Emily's drawings and asked strange questions about where she liked spending time after school. Why hadn't she mentioned this during the original investigation? Because back then, grief and shock had shattered her ability to think clearly. Police interviewed dozens of people, and Walter's name disappeared among hundreds of dead-end leads. The next morning, Sarah shared everything with Detective Pierce. Within days, investigators discovered something deeply unsettling. Walter Grayson had abruptly moved away from Ashwood less than 3 months after Emily disappeared. He sold his property cheaply and relocated to another county without telling most neighbors. Even stranger, records showed he died from a heart attack in 2005. But the mystery grew darker when police learned Walter had not lived alone. His younger brother, Thomas Grayson, still lived nearby. And when Sarah saw a recent photograph of Thomas, her hands began trembling instantly. He was the nervous younger man from the diner. Detective Pierce reopened the investigation officially within 48 hours. Officers tracked Thomas to a small repair garage outside Cedar County and brought him in for questioning. At first, he denied knowing anything about Emily Carter. But detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies in his timeline from 1998. He became visibly anxious whenever Walter's name surfaced. Then investigators uncovered another disturbing detail. In the late 1980s, Walter Grayson had once been questioned, though never charged, in connection with the disappearance of another young girl in Oklahoma. Lack of evidence prevented any arrest, and the case eventually faded away. For Sarah, Hearing this information felt like entering a nightmare she could no longer escape. For nearly 9 years, she had imagined countless possibilities surrounding Emily's disappearance. She feared strangers, drifters, and random criminals passing through town. But now, for the first time, she realized the truth may have been much closer all along. Someone from nearby may have known exactly what happened to her daughter. And if Thomas Grayson truly carried secrets connected to Walter, then Emily's fate might finally be uncovered after almost a decade of darkness. 3 days later, Detective Pierce called Sarah just after midnight. His voice sounded tense. "We found something on the old Grayson property," he said quietly. Sarah felt her heart stop. Outside, snow continued falling across Ashwood as police lights surrounded the abandoned land where Walter once lived. Buried beneath years of dead leaves and frozen soil, investigators had uncovered evidence hidden deep in the woods. And among the items recovered was a small weathered sketchbook with the name Emily Carter written inside the front cover. The moment Detective Alan Pierce told Sarah about the sketchbook, she could barely breathe. The phone slipped slightly in her trembling hands as she stood frozen in her kitchen. For nearly 9 years, every piece of hope had slowly faded into uncertainty, yet now, for the first time, investigators had discovered something undeniably connected to Emily. Sarah drove through the snow-covered roads toward the old Grayson property shortly after midnight. Police vehicles lined the narrow dirt entrance leading into the woods, their flashing lights glowing against the darkness. Officers moved carefully through the freezing air while investigators photographed the scene beneath portable floodlights. The isolated property looked hauntingly abandoned. The old farmhouse sat crooked behind dead trees, its windows broken, and its porch partially collapsed after years of neglect. Sarah stepped out of her car slowly, her boots crunching against frozen ground. Detective Pierce met her near the edge of the woods with a heavy expression on his face. He held a sealed evidence bag carefully in his gloved hands. Inside rested a worn sketchbook stained by moisture and dirt. Even through the damage, Sarah instantly recognized Emily's handwriting across the cover. Her daughter's name. Her daughter's drawings. Still preserved after all those years. Sarah pressed a shaking hand over her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Inside the sketchbook were faded drawings of birds, trees, and the creek near Ashwood Elementary School. Several pages had been damaged by rain and time, but one drawing remained mostly untouched, a picture of a small white house with flowers in front. Their home. Detective Pierce explained that investigators discovered the sketchbook buried beneath loose boards inside an old storage shed behind the farmhouse. Nearby, officers also uncovered children's items hidden inside rusted metal containers, including hair ribbons, old toys, and faded clothing fragments. None could immediately be connected to Emily, but the discovery suggested something deeply disturbing had happened on the property over many years. Sarah felt physically sick. For almost a decade, she had imagined Emily alone and frightened somewhere far away. Now she faced the terrifying possibility that her daughter may have been hidden only miles from home. The investigation moved rapidly after the discovery. Detectives brought Thomas Grayson back for questioning the following morning. This time, confronted with evidence from the property, his calm demeanor collapsed quickly. According to officers present during the interview, Thomas became pale and visibly shaken the moment investigators placed photographs of the sketchbook on the table. For hours, he denied involvement. Then slowly, pieces of the truth began emerging. Thomas admitted that his older brother Walter had become obsessed with Emily during the months before her disappearance. Walter frequently watched families around town from his truck and often spoke about children in unsettling ways. Thomas claimed he argued with Walter repeatedly, but never contacted authorities, because he feared his brother and depended on him financially. Detectives pushed harder. Finally, just after sunset, Thomas broke completely. Through tears and trembling hands, he revealed what happened on June 12, 1998. According to his statement, Walter saw Emily outside Miller's grocery store that evening and offered her a ride home because a storm was approaching. Emily reportedly recognized him from the diner and trusted him enough to enter the truck briefly. But instead of driving toward Maple Street, Walter took her to the isolated property outside Ashwood. Thomas insisted he did not know Emily was there at first. He claimed he returned home later that night and discovered Walter panicking inside the farmhouse while Emily cried in another room. Thomas described arguing violently with his brother and demanding he take the child home immediately. But Walter refused, terrified police would arrest him if Emily spoke about what happened. The details became difficult for investigators to fully verify because Walter had died 2 years earlier, leaving many questions unanswered forever. Still, Thomas confessed that fear controlled him completely during those hours. Rather than contacting authorities, he obeyed Walter and helped conceal evidence connected to Emily's disappearance. For Sarah, hearing the confession shattered something inside her. The pain was overwhelming not only because of what happened, but because the truth had remained hidden for so long while she searched endlessly for answers. She replayed every memory involving Walter Grayson again and again, wondering whether she could have noticed warning signs sooner. Detective Pierce repeatedly reminded her that the responsibility belonged entirely to those who committed the crime, not to a grieving mother who trusted the safety of her town. As investigators continued searching the property over the following week, they uncovered additional evidence confirming Emily had spent time there after disappearing. Hidden beneath loose floorboards inside the farmhouse, forensic teams discovered pages torn from Emily's sketchbook along with candy wrappers matching the strawberry candy purchased from Miller's grocery store on the evening she vanished. Then came the discovery that changed the case completely. Inside an old locked toolbox buried near the woods, investigators found dozens of cassette tapes recorded by Walter Grayson during the late 1990s. Most contained random conversations, radio broadcasts, or personal thoughts. But one tape, labeled only with the date 6/12/98, immediately drew attention. Detective Pierce listened privately before informing Sarah about its contents. The recording captured portions of a conversation between Walter and Emily shortly after she arrived at the property. Emily sounded frightened but calm, repeatedly asking to go home. Walter's voice attempted to reassure her, insisting he only wanted someone to keep him company. At one point, Emily softly mentioned missing her mother. The tape ended abruptly several minutes later. Though incomplete, the recording confirmed Emily had remained alive for some time after disappearing. It also revealed something unexpected. Throughout the conversation, Emily continued speaking bravely and politely despite her fear. Detectives later said her calmness may have prevented the situation from escalating immediately. Thomas eventually agreed to guide investigators toward an area deeper in the woods where Walter often buried personal belongings. After 2 days of careful excavation near a cluster of large oak trees, police uncovered evidence that finally allowed the Carter family to bring Emily home after nearly 9 years of uncertainty. The entire town of Ashwood fell silent when the news spread. Church bells rang softly the evening investigators confirmed Emily had been found. Residents placed flowers and candles along Maple Street, while snow melted slowly beneath the early spring rain. Many people, who had once searched for Emily as volunteers, returned to stand quietly beside Sarah during a candlelight vigil outside Ashwood Elementary School. No speeches could erase the years of pain. No arrest could restore what had been stolen. But for the first time since 1998, Sarah no longer faced endless uncertainty. The questions that haunted every sleepless night finally had answers. Painful answers, but answers nonetheless. Weeks later, Thomas Grayson accepted responsibility for helping conceal the truth for years. During court proceedings, he admitted that fear and cowardice kept him silent, while a grieving mother searched desperately for her child. The judge described the case as one of the most heartbreaking tragedies the county had ever witnessed. Sarah attended every hearing quietly. She never looked at Thomas with anger. Only sadness. Because deep inside, she understood something terrible. A single moment of silence can sometimes destroy countless lives forever. Months later, as spring returned to Ashwood, Sarah finally entered Emily's bedroom and opened the curtains for the first time in years. Sunlight poured softly across the drawings, books, and faded photographs untouched since 1998. She sat on the edge of the bed holding Emily's recovered sketchbook gently in her hands. Inside the final page, investigators had discovered one unfinished drawing Emily created shortly before everything changed forever. It showed a mother and daughter standing together beneath a bright summer sky. At the bottom, written carefully in pencil, were the words, "Home is wherever Mom is." And after 9 long years, Emily finally came home.